A giant rancher ordered a young bride, but a 60-year-old woman stepped off the wagon. The dusty street falls silent. The church bell tolls. Neighbors stare in shock. The rancher, red-faced, expected a young wife to build him a family but. Instead, an older widow stands before him, calm, unshaken, carrying only one battered suitcase. Whispers cut through the crowd. He's been tricked. His pride is on the line, his loneliness laid bare. But just as the town laughs, something darker rides in. The railroad men hammer stakes into his land, claiming the spring that keeps his cattle alive. This widow holds secrets of her own maps, memories, and faith that might save everything. Yet the more she proves her worth, the more the rancher wonders, did God send him the wrong bride, or the only one who can stand beside him when the valley turns against him? The dust is rising, the law is bought, and time is running out. Will he push her away in shame or discover that the love he never wanted is the only thing that can save his land, his soul, and his future? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek as Samuel Pale shifted his weight from one boot to the other. His weathered hands fidgeted with his string tie, unused to such formal attire. Around him, townsfolk gathered with poorly concealed curiosity, their whispers carrying on the warm Colorado breeze. "Ain't every day we get a mail-order bride in these parts," Martha Wilson said loudly from the general store's porch. Fanning herself with her apron, Samuel's jaw tightened. He hadn't wanted this attention, but news traveled fast in a small town. Preacher Roberts stood nearby, his Bible tucked under one arm, offering what he surely thought was a reassuring smile. The distant rumble of wheels drew everyone's attention. The stagecoach appeared through the heat waves rising off the packed earth, the four-horse team kicking up clouds of dust. Samuel straightened his 6'4" frame, his heart hammering against his ribs. After 15 years of solitude on his ranch, maybe now, the coach creaked to a halt. The driver, old Joe Matthews, set the brake and tipped his hat with a knowing grin. Samuel held his breath as the door swung open. A single figure emerged, moving with careful dignity. Samuel blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks. The woman before him had silver hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Fine lines crinkled at the corners of her eyes, which met his directly with quiet strength. She clutched a well-worn leather valise, her knuckles white against the handle. "Dear Lord," someone muttered. The whispers started like a prairie wind through dry grass. She's old enough to be his mother. Poor Samuel, getting swindled like that. What a disappointment. Heat crawled up Samuel's neck and flooded his face. This couldn't be right. The marriage agency had promised. But here stood Mia Bennett, clearly 60 if she was a day. Not the young woman he'd expected to help him build a future. Preacher Roberts cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Brother Samuel." But Samuel couldn't find words. His tongue felt thick as leather in his mouth. Shame and anger warred in his chest. Shame at his public humiliation, anger at being deceived. Yet beneath it all lurked the heavy weight of obligation. He couldn't just leave her standing there. Mia Bennett stood straight-backed through it all, her blue eyes steady despite the cruel whispers. Her simple brown traveling dress might have been plain, but she wore her dignity like a queen's mantle. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the awkward silence. "I understand this isn't what you expected." Samuel worked his jaw, trying to find something, anything to say. The gathered crowd seemed to lean forward, eager for his response. He could feel their stares burning into him like the merciless summer sun. We should get to the ranch," he finally managed, the words coming out gruff and stilted. "It's a fair peace out." He reached for her valise automatically, his mother's lessons in manners overriding his shock. Their fingers brushed briefly as she released the bag, and he noticed how work-worn her hands were, not soft like a city woman's. The crowd parted as Samuel led the way to his wagon, helping Mia up onto the wooden seat with mechanical courtesy. The whispers followed them, cutting like wind-blown sand. What's he going to do with her? Surely he ain't going through with it. Poor woman, coming all this way. Samuel climbed up beside her, gathering the reins in hands that weren't quite steady. The wagon wheels creaked as they pulled away from the cluster of buildings that made up Silver Creek's Main Street. Neither of them spoke as the town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted pine. The sun was settling toward the western mountains by the time they turned onto the rutted track leading to Samuel's ranch. The fading light caught the silver in Mia's hair, reminding him again of the vast gap between what he'd hoped for and what sat beside him now. The house stood dark and unwelcoming against the twilight sky, a solid two-story structure built of rough-hewn logs with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Samuel had been proud of it once, but now he saw it through new eyes, the weathered wood that needed attention. The empty flower beds, the general air of lonely neglect. He helped Mia down from the wagon, still unable to meet her eyes properly. Leading the way up the porch steps, he fumbled with the door key, intensely aware of her presence behind him. The door creaked open on rarely used hinges inside. The lamp he'd lit that morning still burned low on the kitchen table, casting weak light through the gathering shadows. The flame reflected off tin cups left unwashed in the sink and caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Samuel hadn't thought much about the state of his house that morning, but now every unwashed dish and unswept corner seemed to accuse him. Mia stood just inside the door, her valise still in Samuel's grip as they faced each other in the flickering lamplight. The silence between them felt as vast as the prairie itself, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Samuel cleared his throat. "It ain't much," he said roughly, gesturing vaguely at the room with his free hand. "But it's dry. When it rains and warm in winter." "Thank you," Mia replied softly, her voice carrying neither judgment nor disappointment. She stood straight and calm, like a steady flame in the gathering dark, while Samuel felt like a shadow trying to find its proper place. The lamp flickered, sending their shadows dancing on the log walls. Through the window came the lonely call of a whippoorwill, announcing the arrival of night on the Colorado frontier, and with it, the beginning of something neither of them had expected to face. The kitchen seemed to shrink as Samuel and Mia sat across from each other at the scarred oak table. The lamp between them cast stark shadows on their faces. Samuel's fingers drummed against the wooden surface, each tap echoing in the tense silence. "I want answers," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "The truth, if you please." Mia folded her hands in her lap, her spine straight as a fence post. "Yes, you deserve that much." She drew a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the flame dancing in the lamp. "Sarah, my niece. She was the one who answered your advertisement." Oh, she was young, just 20 years old, full of dreams about the West. Samuel's jaw tightened at the mention of the bride he'd expected. What happened to her? The fever took her. Mia's voice caught slightly. 3 days into the journey west, it came on so fast. One morning she was fine. By nightfall, she was burning up. The doctor on the train did what he could, but shook her head, grief casting shadows across her face. "And you decided to take her place." Just like that. The edge in Samuel's voice could have cut steel. "I had nowhere else to go." Mia met his gaze steadily. "Back east, there was nothing left for me but the poorhouse. My husband John died 5 years ago. Then my son Thomas last winter. The bank took our farm." her fingers twisted in her skirts. When Sarah, after she passed, I found her ticket and your letters in her bag. I knew it wasn't right, but I couldn't face going back to nothing. Samuel pushed back from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. You can't. Give me what I need, what I wanted. His face flushed dark as he forced out the words. Children, a family. No, Mia agreed quietly. I can't bear children anymore, but I can cook, clean, mend clothing. I can keep books and tend a garden. I can make a real home here. She gestured at the dusty kitchen with its unwashed dishes. I may not be young, Mr. Hale, but I'm strong and I know how to work. The truth in her words stung like wind-blown sand. Samuel couldn't bear to look at her anymore. This calm, dignified woman who had appended all his plans. He stormed out of the house, letting the screen door slam behind him. The night air hit his face, cool and clean. He strode to the barn, his boots kicking up dust. Inside, the horses nickered softly in greeting. The familiar sense of hay and leather should have been comforting, but tonight they couldn't ease the turmoil in his chest. Damn it all. He slammed his fist into a fence post, welcoming the sharp pain that shot through his hand. The horses startled at his outburst, stamping nervously in their stalls. Samuel forced himself to breathe slowly, like calming a spooked horse. He moved through his nightly routine mechanically, measuring out feed, checking water troughs, running his hands down warm flanks to check for problems. The ordinary tasks helped steady him, but couldn't quiet the thoughts circling like coyotes in his mind. She'd been honest, at least. T had to give her that. Could have spun some tale, tried to hide the truth longer. And there was something in the way she held herself. No simpering, no begging. Just straight-backed dignity and clear eyes. The moon was high by the time he finished in the barn. He stood in the doorway, watching its silver light paint the prairie in shades of gray. The house waited, dark except for a single lamp still burning in the kitchen window. When he finally went inside, the fire had been carefully banked for the night. A plate sat waiting on the table, covered with a clean cloth beans, cornbread, and what smelled like apple pie. His coffee cup had been washed and sat ready beside the pot on the stove. Samuel ate mechanically, the food tasting like dust in his mouth. He couldn't deny it was better than his own cooking. The pie, especially, brought back memories of his mother's kitchen that he thought he'd forgotten. He slept poorly that night, tossing on his narrow bed upstairs while the house creaked around him. His prayers, when they finally came, were awkward and angry. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, why did you see fit to mock me this way? I asked for a wife, a chance at family, and you sent me. He couldn't finish the thought. The silence offered no answers. Dawn found him stumbling down the stairs, his eyes heavy from lack of sleep. He pulled up short at the sight through the kitchen window. Mia was already in the barn, a clean apron tied over her dress, efficiently milking his cow as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. He watched, unseen, as she spoke softly too. The animal, her hands moving with steady rhythm. The early morning light caught the silver in her hair, making it glow like a halo. There was something both foreign and familiar about the scene, like finding a stranger's furniture, arranged perfectly in your own house. The day passed in a fog of awkward moments and avoided glances. Mia moved through his house like a quiet ghost, somehow knowing exactly what needed doing. By supper time, the floors were swept, the windows shone, and the kitchen smelled of fresh bread instead of stale coffee. They ate together in stiff silence, the tick of the clock on the wall marking each endless minute. Samuel couldn't help noticing how she'd set the table properly, with a clean cloth, and his mother's old dishes that he'd forgotten were in the cupboard. The food was good, real good, but that almost made it worse. Everything she did, every quiet, competent action, just reminded him that she wasn't what he'd wanted. Not the young bride he dreamed would help him build a future, bear his children, grow old beside him. Instead, God had sent him this steady, capable woman who made him feel like a stranger in his own home. When night fell again, Samuel retreated to the porch, searching the star-filled sky for answers. His prayers were no more eloquent than the night before. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't understand your plan here. This isn't what I asked for. This isn't what I need." But even as the words left his lips, a small voice in his heart whispered that perhaps he didn't know what he needed as well as he thought he did. Morning sunlight streamed through the unwashed windows as Samuel pushed his chair back from the breakfast table. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. "Mrs. Bennet." Mia looked up from clearing away the dishes, her eyes steady. "Yes, Mr. Hale. I've been thinking." He ran a calloused hand through his hair. "You can stay for a week, until I decide what's to be done." "That's very kind of you." Mia's voice held no trace of irony, though Samuel searched for it. "Ain't kindness," he muttered. "Just proper is all." Mia nodded, turning back to the dishes without another word. Samuel watched as she rolled up her sleeves and set to work, her movements precise and practiced. The familiar clatter of plates in the wash basin filled the silence between them. Throughout the morning, Samuel found his attention drawn again and again to the changes taking place in his house. The floors, perpetually dusty since his mother's passing years ago, now showed clean beneath Mia's broom. The curtains hung straight, the windows sparkled, and something that smelled remarkably like cornbread baked in the oven. By midday, he discovered his work shirts, the ones with torn sleeves and missing buttons, had been mended. The stitches were so neat they almost disappeared into the fabric. He held one up to the light, frowning at this evidence of Mia's quiet competence. The house felt different, less hollow. The empty rooms that had echoed with his solitude now hummed with small domestic sounds. The scrape of the broom, the clink of dishes, the soft murmur of Mia's voice as she hummed while working. A rider approached around noon, the hoofbeats, drawing Samuel to the porch. It was Ted Wilson from the neighboring ranch, barely hiding his smirk beneath his hat brim. "Heard about your bride, Hale?" Ted drawled. "Quite a surprise, I reckon." Samuel's hands clenched on the porch railing. "Got business here, Wilson? Just being neighborly." Ted's eyes strayed to the kitchen window where Mia's silhouette moved past. "Though I must say, she ain't exactly what folks expected when you said, 'Get off my land.'" Samuel's voice came, out low and dangerous. Ted raised his hands in mock surrender, still smirking as he turned his horse. No offense meant Hale, no offense at all. Samuel watched him ride away, fury building in his chest. He needed supplies, but the thought of facing more gossip in town made his jaw clench. Still, the feed was running low, and they needed sugar. The trip to town proved as bad as he'd feared. Whispers followed him down the street, and even old Jim at the mercantile couldn't keep the knowing look off his face as Samuel gathered his supplies. "Heard about your mail-order bride?" Jim ventured, weighing out sugar. Must have been quite a shock when Samuel slammed his payment down on the counter hard enough to make the coins bounce. The supplies followed, crashing into his wagon with more force than necessary. His face burned with humiliation and rage as he urged his horses homeward at the town well. He caught sight of Mia talking with Maria Sanchez, the Mexican widow who lived on the outskirts of town. The two women stood close together, Mia's silver head bent near Maria's black one as they spoke softly. He watched as Maria gestured enthusiastically, explaining something, while Mia nodded and smiled. See, he heard Maria say as he passed. "The Childs, they make the stew much better. I will bring you some tomorrow." "That's very kind," Mia replied warmly. "I'll trade you my pickle recipe, the one my grandmother taught me." Samuel turned away, oddly unsettled by this glimpse of Mia building connections in his town. She caught up with him a few minutes later, carrying her water bucket with steady hands despite her age. That evening, the stew she served was rich with tender beef and vegetables from the kitchen garden she'd started clearing. The aroma filled the kitchen, making Samuel's stomach growl despite himself. "This is good," he admitted gruffly, sopping up the gravy with a piece of fresh cornbread. "Thank you." Mia's voice was quiet, touched with a sadness that made Samuel look up sharply. She sat with perfect posture, eating small, neat bites, but something in her eyes spoke of deep weariness. Later that night, Samuel lay in his bed, listening to the wind moan around the eaves. From down the hall came the soft sound of Mia's voice, singing low and sweet. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The familiar hymn stirred memories of church services with his mother, of community and belonging he'd almost forgotten he missed. But pride and anger still churned in his gut, anger at being deceived, at becoming the subject of town gossip, at having his dreams of a young family snatched away. Yet beneath these feelings ran an undercurrent of unease. The house felt more like a home than it had in years. The rooms were clean, the food was good, and despite himself, he'd grown used to the quiet companionship of shared meals. The wind rose higher outside, its lonely howl, a reminder of all the solitary nights he'd spent in this house. Mia's hymn continued, soft and sure, a thread of grace in the darkness. Samuel stared at the shadowed rafters, his heart torn between what he'd lost and what he might, against all expectations, have found. The morning sun cast long shadows across the prairie as Samuel saddled 2 horses in the barn. He'd avoided this task for days, but the fence lines needed checking, and having an extra pair of eyes would make the work go faster. Still, his movements were stiff with discomfort as he led the horses to where Mia waited by the house. She stood ready in a sensible riding skirt, her silver hair neat beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Samuel noticed she handled herself well as she mounted, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. "You've ridden before," he said, surprise coloring his voice. "My husband kept horses." Mia adjusted her reins with familiar grace. "We had. Small farm back east." They rode in silence at first, the horses' hooves raising small puffs of dust. The morning air was cool, heavy with the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Samuel found himself stealing glances at his companion, noting how she sat straight in the saddle, how her eyes constantly scanned the landscape. Near the creek bed, she pulled up her horse. "That section looks weak." She pointed to where the wire sagged between posts. Samuel nodded, impressed despite himself. "Good eye." He dismounted to check the fence's tension, working the wire with calloused hands. "Been meaning to fix this stretch." "John, my husband, used to say a fence is only as strong as its weakest point." Mia's voice held a touch of remembered warmth. "Your husband sounds like he knew ranching. He knew hard work." Mia's eyes grew distant. "We lost him to fever 6 years ago. Our son too, not long after." Samuel's hands stilled on the wire. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly, recognizing the weight of loss in her voice. After a moment, he added, "Gets lonely out here sometimes, especially at night when the wind's up." "Yes," Mia said softly. "Loneliness has a way of echoing." They rode on, checking fence posts and mending where needed. The silence between them felt less strained now, filled with the natural sounds of the prairie, meadowlarks calling, grass rustling in the breeze. As they approached the north pasture, Samuel noticed something out of place. Stakes protruded from the ground near the spring, their fresh cut would stark against the grass. Red surveyor's ribbons fluttered from their tops like blood-bright flags. "No," Samuel growled, spurring his horse forward. He swung down, yanking one stake from the ground. "Those railroad vultures." Mia dismounted more carefully, examining another stake. There's survey markers. Railroad's been pushing west. Samuel's voice was thick with fury. But this spring, this water, it's mine. My cattle depend on it. He kicked another stake, sending it flying. Without this water, half my herd won't survive the summer. We should go to town, Mia suggested. Find out what's behind this. Samuel wanted to argue, to tear up every stake and dare anyone to challenge him, but Mia's steady gaze held wisdom he couldn't dismiss. They rode for town, tension building in Samuel's shoulders with every mile. The railroad agent's office occupied the finest building on Main Street, its fresh paint and polished windows declaring its prosperity. Inside, a man in an expensive suit looked up from his desk, his smile as slick as snake oil. Mr. Hale. The agent's voice dripped false welcome. What brings you to my office today? Found your stakes on my land. Samuel's words came out like stones. That spring belongs to my ranch. Actually, the agent's smile widened as he shuffled through some papers. According to these documents, the railroad has legal claim to that watershed. Progress, you see, Mr. Hale. The future of this territory depends on the railroad. Papers. Don't water cattle. Perhaps not, but they do outrank them. The agent's smile turned cruel. The law's quite clear on this matter. Samuel's fists clenched. One step forward, and he could wipe that smirk off the man's face. But Mia's hand touched his arm, gentle yet firm. Violence won't help, she murmured. It'll only give them more power over you. The agent's eyes flicked between them, amused. Listen to your wife, Mr. Hale. A man in your position should choose his battles carefully. They left the office, Samuel's rage barely contained. The ride home passed in tense silence as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of fire. That evening, lantern light filled the parlor with warm shadows as Mia poured 2 cups of coffee. Samuel paced like a caged animal, his boots wearing a path in the floorboards. My husband faced something similar, Mia said quietly. Land barons wanted our farm. They had papers too, all legal, all proper, all corrupt to the core. Samuel stopped pacing. What happened? They knew the law better than we did. Knew how to twist it, how to make it serve them instead of justice. Mia's eyes shone in the lantern light. But John didn't stand alone. He gathered neighbors, other farmers facing the same threat. Together, they found a lawyer willing to fight, found witnesses to expose the corruption, and they won. Mia set down her cup. Not easily, not quickly, but they won because they stood together. Samuel, you can't fight this alone. The railroads, too powerful. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their wild voices rising and falling across the darkened prairie. Samuel stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. He said nothing, but his silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of rejection, but of deep consideration. Mia watched him, understanding in her eyes. They both knew that darker clouds were gathering than those that brought prairie thunderclouds that would test not just Samuel's strength, but his ability to trust, to change, to accept help from unexpected quarters. The days flowed one into another, like a gentle stream. With each sunrise, the ranch house shed more of its roughness, transforming under Mia's patient hands. She worked quietly but steadily, her presence settling into the home's very bones. Samuel noticed the changes gradually. First came the curtains. Fashioned from feed sacks, she'd bleached and stitched with tiny, careful stitches. They softened the harsh glare of the prairie sun, casting dappled shadows across the plank floors. Then appeared small touches, a bunch of prairie flowers in a tin can, a carefully arranged shelf of worn books, a braided rug beside his chair. The house began to smell different too. Instead of just leather and dust, the air carried the warmth of fresh bread, the richness of stewing beans, the sweetness of apple pie. And there was music. Hymns hummed softly as Mia worked, her clear voice lifting Amazing Grace or Rock of Ages into the quiet corners of their shared space. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Samuel sat at the kitchen table watching Mia ladle beans into their bowls. Steam rose from the fresh cornbread cooling on the windowsill. The familiar scents wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket, stirring memories he'd long buried. "Reminds me of my mama's cooking," he said softly, surprising himself with the admission. Mia set his bowl before him, her movements graceful and unhurried. "Tell me about her." Samuel stared into his bowl, stirring the beans slowly. "Lost her when I was 12. PA never remarried. Said no woman could replace her." He paused, then added, "Reckon that's partly why I never rushed to marry. Saw how lonely Pa got, how the loneliness aided him." Mia settled into her chair, her attention focused entirely on him. In the lamplight, her silver hair gleamed like a halo. "That's not all of it, though, is it?" she asked gently. Samuel's spoon clinked against his bowl. "No." He took a deep breath. "War changed me, left scars. That ain't just on the outside." His hand unconsciously touched his left shoulder, where Confederate shrapnel still lay buried. "Came back different. Figured it was easier to stick to cattle. They don't ask questions, don't need explanations. But they don't warm a home," Mia said softly. "No." Samuel's voice roughened. Years jest. Slipped away. Wanted children once, a family. But he gestured at himself at the weathered lines in his face, the gray threading his temples. "Time has its own way of moving," Mia agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of memory. "I lost my Thomas at Gettysburg, my only son. He was 19. Samuel looked up sharply, recognizing the deep ache in her words. "John, my husband, he never really recovered from the news. Worked himself sick trying to forget. The fever took him 6 years ago." Mia's eyes glistened in the lamplight, but her voice remained steady. "I thought my heart would shrivel up and die. But God had other plans." What plans could make up for such loss? Samuel asked, his own grief rising to meet hers. "New family," Mia said simply. "Not to replace the old, but to heal alongside it. The good book says God sets the lonely in families. Sometimes those families don't look like what we expected." Samuel sat back, considering her words. The kitchen felt different somehow, as if their shared grief had opened a door between them. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the night had settled deep around the ranch house, Samuel found himself drawn to the soft lamplight, spilling from the parlor. Mia sat in the rocking chair, her Bible open on her lap. Without speaking, he settled into his own chair nearby. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Mia's voice was gentle as she read, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Samuel closed his eyes, letting the familiar words wash over him. The scripture continued, speaking of peace that passed understanding, of hope that anchored the soul. He found himself leaning forward, drawn not just by the words, but by the quiet faith in Mia's voice. When she finished reading, silence filled the room. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the comfortable quiet of two souls who had shared their deepest hurts and found understanding. "Maybe," Samuel said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "God ain't mocked me after all." In the lamplight, he caught Mia's faint smile, saw the wisdom and warmth in her eyes. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The moment held its own truth, its own healing. The fire burned lower still, its embers glowing like fallen stars. Outside, a nightbird called, its song echoing across the prairie darkness. Inside, two people who had arrived as strangers sat together, their shared grief building an unexpected bridge between their hearts. Samuel looked at Mia's serene face, at the silver hair that had once mortified him in front of the whole town, and felt something shift inside his chest. Here was strength he hadn't expected, wisdom he hadn't known he needed, and perhaps, though he hardly dared think it, a kind of love he hadn't known to hope for. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the prairie sky stretching endless blue above the little white church. Samuel adjusted his collar, uncomfortable in his Sunday best, as he and Mia walked up the worn wooden steps. His boots, polished too. A shine felt stiff and foreign compared to his usual working footwear. Mia walked beside him, her gray dress pressed neat, a small Bible clutched in her weathered hands. Her silver hair was swept back simply but elegantly, and she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers that followed their entrance. "Did you hear? That's the mail-order bride. Old enough to be his mother." What was he thinking? Whispers rustled through the congregation like wind through dry grass. But Mia simply lifted her chin, her expression serene as she took her seat beside Samuel in the wooden pew. Samuel felt his jaw tighten at the gossip, but Mia's calm presence beside him helped steady his temper. The service proceeded as it always had, familiar hymns, scripture readings, and Reverend Thompson's earnest sermon about loving thy neighbor. But something felt different to Samuel. Having Mia beside him, her clear voice joining the hymns, made the worn wooden walls feel more welcoming than they had in years. After the final amen, the congregation spilled out into the sunshine. Samuel expected Mia to hurry home, away from the stares and whispers. Instead, she surprised him by walking straight toward a group of Ute women standing apart from the others, their colorful shawls bright against the weathered church boards. "Good morning," Mia said warmly, inclining her head respectfully. "I'm Mia Bennett. I've seen you at the trading post, but we haven't properly met." The women looked startled at being addressed so directly, but the eldest among them, her face lined like ancient leather, responded with careful English. "I am Morning Star. These are my daughters." Samuel watched, amazed, as Mia engaged them in conversation, asking about their children and trading tips about which wild herbs made the best tea. Her genuine interest and respect gradually drew gentle smiles from the women. Before they parted, Morning Star had invited Mia to visit their camp to learn their beadwork patterns. That evening, as they rode home in the wagon, Samuel found himself studying Mia's profile in the golden light. "Never seen anyone talk to the Ute women like that," he said, finally. "Like they was just neighbors, aren't they?" Mia asked simply. "God's children, same as us." The next week, Mia announced her intention to host a supper for their neighbors. Samuel protested at first. He'd always kept to himself, but Mia was gently insistent. "A house needs voices," she said firmly, already mixing biscuit dough. "And hearts need community." So on Thursday evening, their ranch house filled with an unlikely gathering. Pedro and Miguel, Mexican vaqueros who helped with Samuel's cattle. Drives arrived with their wives bearing dishes of spicy beans. Sarah Johnson, the school teacher, brought an apple pie. 3 widowed ranch wives from neighboring spreads came bearing preserves and fresh butter. Even Morning Star appeared briefly, presenting Mia with a beautifully beaded bag. The kitchen table, extended with boards, groaned under the weight of Mia's cooking: golden brown chicken, fluffy biscuits, green beans with bacon, cornbread, and 3 kinds of pie. The sense of good food and coffee filled the house, mixing with the sound of conversation and laughter. Samuel stood in the corner, watching in wonder as Mia moved among their guests. She drew out shy Sarah with questions about her students, listened intently to Pedro's stories about his grandmother's recipes, and made sure everyone's cup stayed full. Her warmth seemed to fill the room, breaking down barriers that had stood for years. "Your wife," Pedro said to Samuel, his dark eyes twinkling. "She makes good food, better than the fancy hotel in Denver. But more important, she makes good heart in people." Samuel nodded, not correcting the assumption about their marriage. He was too busy watching how Mia had somehow transformed his Stark ranch house into something else. Entirely a place of welcome and warmth. After the meal, when everyone sat content and comfortable, Mia began to sing. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she led them in amazing grace. Samuel found himself joining in, his deep bass mixing with her clear soprano. One by one, others added their voices: Sarah's sweet alto, Pedro's rich tenor, the ranch wife's harmony. The music swelled, filling every corner of the house. Samuel looked around at the faces lit by lamplight: Mexican, white, Native American, all unified in song. He felt something in his chest expand, a joy he hadn't known in years. When the last note faded, there was a moment of shared silence, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then the conversations resumed, warmer and more intimate than before. Samuel noticed how the ranch wives, who usually kept to themselves, were trading recipes with Pedro's wife Maria. Sarah was showing Morningstar's daughter a book of poetry. His house had become a meeting place, a crossing of paths he'd never imagined possible. The evening stretched on, golden with goodwill, until the last guest departed into the star-filled night. Samuel and Mia stood in the doorway, waving goodbye as wagon wheels crunched down the drive in the quiet that followed. They worked together to clean up, Samuel washing dishes while Mia dried them. The comfortable silence between them felt different, now charged with something new. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice gruff with emotion. "You've changed this place, Mia. Made it more than just wood and stone." Mia paused in her drying, looking up at him. The lamplight caught the silver in her hair, the gentle wisdom in her eyes. Her smile was soft, understanding all he wasn't saying about loneliness transformed, about walls coming down, about a house becoming something more. She didn't need him to say the word home. She heard it in his tone, in the way his shoulders had relaxed, in how his eyes now held warmth instead of weariness. She simply handed him another plate to wash, humming softly as they worked together in the peaceful kitchen. The morning sun beat down on the courthouse square as Samuel shifted nervously on his feet. Folks were gathering more than he'd expected. Ranchers in dusty work clothes sat shoulder-tooled with Ute families on the weathered benches. Mexican vaqueros stood in clusters, their conversations a mix of Spanish and English. Sarah Johnson, the schoolteacher, had brought paper and ink. Mia stood quietly beside Samuel, her presence steady as a foundation stone. "Just speak from your heart," she murmured. "Tell them what's true." Samuel cleared his throat, adjusting his hat. He'd never been one for public speaking, preferring the company of cattle to crowds. But the sight of those survey stakes by his spring still burned in his mind. "Reckon you all know why we're here," he began, his deep voice carrying across the square. "Railroad men came sneaking onto my land, claiming they got papers for the spring that waters half our herds." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Samuel gained confidence, remembering Mia's advice about speaking plain and true. "But it ain't just my spring thereafter," he continued. "Today, it's my water. Tomorrow, it might be your grazing land or your hunting grounds." He nodded toward the Ute families. "Or your crops." This to the Mexican farmers. Morningstar, the Ute elder, spoke up. "The Iron Horse already took much from my people. Now they want more." "That's right," Samuel said, warming to his topic. "They think they can divide us, take what they want piece by piece. But I say we stand together." Mia stepped forward, her voice clear and calm. "Perhaps we could petition the county court," she suggested. Show them we're united against this theft." Samuel shot her a grateful look. Miss Bennet speaks sense. If enough of us sign, they'll have to listen. Sarah Johnson raised her hand. "I can write up the petition right now, make it proper and legal-like." For the next hour, Sarah's pen scratched across paper as folks gathered round, offering suggestions. Mia moved through the crowd, smoothing ruffled feathers when tempers flared, suggesting words that would carry weight with the authorities. Pedro, one of Samuel's vaqueros, stood up. "My father lost his ranch to such men in Texas. They care nothing. For the law, unless we make them care, I will sign." Asterisk, one by one, they came forward. Ranchers with calloused hands made their marks. Ute leaders signed in careful English letters. Mexican farmers added their names in elegant script. Even the widow McDougal, who rarely left her homestead, stepped up to sign. Samuel watched in amazement. These were people who normally barely spoke to each other, divided by language and custom. Yet here they were, united against a common threat. The sun was setting when they finished. Samuel held up the petition, several pages thick with signatures. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing off the courthouse walls. He felt a surge of pride, not in himself, but in what they'd accomplished together. "Never thought I'd see the day," old Jim Tucker said, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "You're a natural leader, Hale." Samuel shook his head. "Ain't me? It's all of us together." The ride home was quiet, dust kicking up behind their wagon wheels. The petition sat carefully folded in Samuel's vest pocket, like a precious thing. "I still can't believe it," he said finally. "All those folks standing together. Never seen anything like it." Mia smiled in the gathering dusk. People want to do what's right. Sometimes they just need someone brave enough to take the first step. Back at the ranch, lamplight warmed the kitchen windows. Samuel hung his hat on its peg, then pulled out the petition. He spread it carefully on the table, reading through the names again. Each signature represented a neighbor, a family, a story. "I never would have thought to do this," he admitted. "Probably would have just got myself arrested trying to fight them with my fists." Mia placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but he felt its warmth through his sleeve. "Justice needs more than strong arms, Samuel. It needs courage. To bring people together to stand up for what's right in ways that last." Samuel nodded slowly. "Reckon you're right about that." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "Like you're right about most things." The wind picked up outside, rustling through the cottonwoods. Samuel carefully folded the petition and set it aside. Then, surprising himself, he sank to his knees beside the table. "Lord," he began roughly, his voice thick with emotion. "Bing? A while since I talked to you proper. But I'm grateful tonight. Grateful for neighbors willing to stand together. Grateful for—" He glanced up, seeing Mia standing quietly in the doorway, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "Grateful for those who help us see better ways." Mia's hands were clasped at her heart, and though she made no sound, her presence filled the room with something like grace. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the walls as Samuel continued his prayer, speaking to God with an openness he hadn't felt in years. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Samuel stood before Judge Kincaid, his weathered hands gripping the petition. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Mia sat in the front row, her spine straight as a fence post, hands folded neatly in her lap. "Your Honor," Samuel began, his deep voice steady despite his nerves, "I bring before you the voices of our community." He held up the petition, its pages thick with signatures. 57 citizens, ranchers, farmers, merchants, and families, all united against this unlawful taking of water rights. Behind him, the benches creaked with the weight of his neighbors. Morning Star sat dignified in his traditional dress, while Pedro and his vaqueros filled an entire row. The widow McDougal dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and Sarah Johnson kept her schoolteacher's posture, chin held high, the railroad's lawyer. Mr. Harrison adjusted his silk tie and rose smoothly to his feet. His polished boots clicked against the floorboards as he approached the judge's bench. Your Honor, while this collection of signatures is touching, it hardly constitutes a legal argument. The railroad's claim is properly filed and documented. Judge Kincaid leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined the petition. Samuel held his breath. The judge's reputation for fairness gave him hope, even as Harrison's smirk made his fists clench. I see here signatures from the Ute settlement, the judge noted, his voice neutral, and from the Mexican quarter, plus every rancher from Red Rock to the Wilson Spread. Yes, sir, Samuel replied, because this affects us all. That spring feeds 3 creeks that water half the county's cattle. The railroad dams it up for their water tower. It'll destroy more than just my herd. The judge nodded slowly, stroking his gray beard. I'll take this under consideration. Expect my ruling by telegram this evening. Outside the courthouse, beneath the warm afternoon sun, Samuel found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Old Jim Tucker pumped his hand vigorously. You showed them, Hale. Ain't never heard you string so many words together, but by thunder, you made them count. Pedro slapped his back, grinning. Mi amigo, you speak for all of us today. We celebrate? No. Before Samuel could answer, Mia stepped forward. The ranch house is open to all our friends tonight, she announced. There'll be pie enough for everyone. The celebration transformed their home. Lanterns blazed from every window, and the sound of fiddles filled the evening air. Women crowded Mia's kitchen, rolling out pie crusts and sharing recipes. Men gathered on the porch, passing a jug of Pedro's homebrew and retelling the courthouse scene with growing embellishment. Samuel watched it all with a sense of wonder. His house had never held so much life. The scent of Mia's apple pies wafted through the rooms, mixing with pipe smoke and coffee. Children chased each other around the yard while their parents danced to Jim Tucker's fiddle. Come on, Hale, someone shouted. Show us how light on your feet you are. Samuel shook his head, but Mia appeared at his elbow. Just one dance, she said softly. To celebrate our community's courage, awkwardly, Samuel took her hand. He wasn't much for dancing, but Mia's calm presence steadied him. They moved stiffly to the music while their neighbors clapped in time. Look at them, the widow McDougal whispered loudly to Sarah Johnson. They make a fine pair, don't they? Samuel's ears burned, but Mia just smiled, her silver hair catching the lamplight. For a moment, everything felt right in his world. The ranch house glowed with warmth and fellowship, and the woman in his arms had somehow become essential to his life without him noticing. The thunder of hoofbeats cut through the music. A rider appeared in the yard, dust coating his clothes. Telegram for Samuel Hale. The dancing stopped. The fiddles fell silent. Samuel's hands dropped from Mia's waist as he stepped forward to take the yellow envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open. The lamplight seemed to dim as he read the words. His face hardened, jaw clenching tight. Without a word, he handed the telegram to Mia and strode out onto the dark porch. Mia's clear voice broke the silence. The judge has ruled the petition invalid. The railroad's claim stands. A murmur of anger and disbelief rippled through the crowd. Morning Star shook his head sadly. The white man's law speaks with a forked tongue, he said quietly. Samuel stood at the porch railing, his broad shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. The celebration dissolved behind him as neighbors gathered their children and quietly departed. Words of encouragement and promises to fight on fell on deaf ears. Mia found him there later, after the last wagon had rolled away. The house stood dark and silent, pie plates half emptied on the kitchen table, the fiddles packed away. She touched his arm gently. "We must keep faith, Samuel," she said. "This isn't the end." Faith, his laugh was bitter. "I was a fool to think we could win against their money and their lawyers. Should have known better than to hope." "The fool is the one who gives up when God still has plans," Mia replied firmly. "You united this community. That means something." Samuel shook his head, his voice rough with defeat. "Means nothing if we can't protect what's ours. All those folks trusted me to lead them, and I failed." The last lamp burned low in the kitchen window, casting weak light across the porch. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing Samuel's mood. The night pressed in around them, dark and heavy with disappointment. Mia stood quietly beside him, her presence steady even in defeat. But for once, even her unwavering faith couldn't pierce Samuel's despair. The taste of almost victory made the loss that much harder to bear. Inside, the clock ticked away the minutes as the celebration's warmth faded into silence. The petition lay forgotten on the kitchen table, its signatures a testament to hope that had proved as fleeting as morning dew. The next morning dawned harsh and bright, the sun offering no comfort to Samuel's troubled spirit. He rode into town, with a gnawing emptiness in his gut, needing supplies but dreading the faces he would meet. Yesterday's defeat sat like bitter medicine in his mouth. Main Street stretched before him, dusty and familiar. The general store's bell jingled as he tied his horse outside. He could feel eyes watching from behind lace curtains, could sense the whispers starting. The proud rancher who thought he could fight the railroad now brought low as he reached for the store's door handle. Rough laughter erupted from the saloon across the street. 3 men lounged against the railing, railroad badges glinting on their vests. The tallest one, a burly fellow with a thick mustache, elbowed his companion. "Well, if it ain't the rancher who can't keep his water or find himself a proper wife," he drawled, loud enough to carry across the street. "Guess when you're desperate enough to marry a grandmother, you ain't got much fight left in you." Samuel's hand froze on the door handle. Blood rushed to his face as the men's laughter grew louder. "Heard tell she's old enough to be his mama," another one called out. Maybe that's why he lost his nerve in front of the judge, too busy playing house with Granny. Samuel's vision narrowed to a red tunnel. His boots hit the wooden sidewalk with heavy thuds as he crossed the street, fists clenched at his sides. The railroad men straightened, hands drifting toward their gun belts, but their smirks remained fixed. "Something eating at you, Hal?" the mustached one asked, spreading his arms wide. "Truth hurts worse than losing your spring." Samuel's right. Hand coiled into a tight fist. One punch could wipe that smirk away. But Mia's voice whispered in his memory, "Violence won't win this fight." With tremendous effort, he unclenched his fingers. "Ain't worth my time," he growled, turning away. Their mocking laughter followed him back across the street. "That's right. Run home to Mama, wife. Maybe she'll kiss it better." Samuel's face burned as he mounted his horse, leaving his errands undone. The ride home passed in a blur of shame and fury. By the time he reached the ranch house, his temper had built to a thunderhead. Mia stood at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. She looked up as he slammed through the door, her face concerned at his dark expression. "Samuel, what's wrong?" "Everything," he exploded, throwing his hat across the room. "The whole town's laughing. At me. At us. This whole thing, the petition, standing up to the railroad, it was all for nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Mia said quietly. "We showed people they could stand together, stand together. Samuel's laugh was harsh. For what? So we could all lose together? So I could look like an even bigger fool. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal. And now those railroad men are out there calling me weak, saying I couldn't even find myself a proper wife. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mia's stirring spoon stopped moving. I see, she said softly. So that's what truly burns, not losing the spring, but being mocked for marrying an old woman. That's not what Samuel started, then stopped, his anger suddenly tangled with shame. You deserve better than this. Better than being tied to a man who can't even protect his own land. Better than being laughed at because of me. I deserve to make my own choices, Mia replied, her voice trembling slightly. And I chose to stand beside you, Samuel Hale. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps you deserve someone younger. Someone who won't bring mockery down on your head. She untied her apron slowly, folding it with careful movements. I'll stay at the boarding house in town until you decide what you truly want. Whether that's fighting for your land or finding yourself a proper wife. Samuel watched, frozen, as she climbed the stairs to gather her belongings. The anger drained from him, leaving only a hollow ache. When she returned, carrying her worn carpet bag, he couldn't meet her eyes. The stew needs another hour to simmer, she said quietly, setting her bag by the door. There's cornbread in the warming oven. She pulled on her shawl, her movements precise and controlled despite the tears shining in her eyes. I'll pray for you, Samuel, that you find whatever it is you're looking for. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Samuel stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the life she had built here, curtains she had sewn, plants she had tended, the orderly comfort she had created from his bachelor chaos. Now it all felt like accusations. Evening crept in, bringing no peace. Samuel ate his supper alone at the kitchen table, the stew tasteless in his mouth. The house pressed in around him, darker and emptier than it had ever felt before. No hymns drifted down from upstairs. No quiet footsteps crossed the floor. No gentle voice asked about his day. From the pasture came the low, worried sounds of cattle calling for water. The spring still flowed tonight, but soon the railroad would dam it up. And then what? He had failed at everything, failed to protect his land, failed to lead his neighbors, failed to recognize the blessing God had sent him in Mia. The silence wrapped around him like a shroud. He had thought he knew loneliness before, in all those years of solitude. But this was worse, so much worse, because now he knew what he was missing. The warmth of shared meals, the comfort of evening prayers, the steady presence of someone who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Samuel pushed away his half-eaten supper and buried his face in his hands. The kitchen clock ticked away the empty minutes, each sound an echo of his folly. Outside, a coyote's cry rose up, wild and mournful in the gathering dark. Samuel's boots echoed through the empty house each morning, a hollow sound that mocked his solitude. 5 days had passed since Mia left, though it felt like 5 years. He moved through his routine like a ghost, touching nothing she had arranged, leaving her curtains and potted herbs untouched, as if preserving a museum of what could have been. The coffee he brewed was bitter and harsh, nothing like the smooth blend Mia had perfected. He drank it black, standing at the kitchen window, watching dawn paint the pastures gold. His cattle clustered near the spring, restless and uneasy, as if they too sensed the changes coming. Out on his daily rides, dust coated his throat and clothes. The late summer heat pressed down like a wool blanket, making even his horse sluggish. Samuel checked fences mechanically, his thoughts drifting to the empty chair at his supper table. The quiet where Mia's hymns used to be dot. At night, he would sometimes catch himself listening for her soft footsteps upstairs or the creak of her rocking chair. Instead, only cricket song filtered through the windows. In those dark hours, he could almost hear the echo of her evening hymn, Amazing Grace, floating like a ghost through the rafters. One evening, Tom Wheeler rode up just before sunset, his bay horse lathered from the heat. "Evening, Samuel," Tom called, accepting a dipper of well water. "Saw your missus in town today?" Samuel's shoulders stiffened. "She ain't my missus anymore." "Well, whatever you call her, she's making quite a stir at the courthouse." "Been there most days this week, talking with folks, looking through old records." Tom wiped his mouth. "My Sarah says she's gathering up quite a crowd, church ladies, ranch widows, even some of the Ute women from out past the creek." Samuel's hand tightened on the water pump handle. "What's she doing at the courthouse?" "Can't rightly say," Tom shrugged. "But she's got your late neighbor Stanley's widow bringing in some kind of papers, and I heard tell she's been studying up on water rights cases from back east." The news sat uneasily in Samuel's gut. That evening, he pulled out the hard cider he kept for special occasions, pouring generous measures as the sun set. The alcohol burned, but didn't ease the ache in his chest. He drank until the room spun slightly, brooding over Mia's mysterious activities in town. Was she building some kind of case against him, planning to claim part of his ranch? The thoughts twisted in his mind, though they felt wrong, as wrong. As the empty chair across from him at the table, dark clouds began gathering over the mountains, promising the first real rain in weeks. Samuel stumbled out onto his porch, watching lightning flicker in the distance. His cattle lowed nervously in the pasture, sensing the coming storm. The first heavy drops began to fall as Samuel's legs gave way. He found himself on his knees in the dirt of his front yard, face lifted to the sky. All his carefully constructed walls crumbled at last, leaving him raw and broken before his maker. "Lord," he choked out, "I've been such a fool." Lightning flashed, illuminating the tears on his weathered face. "You sent me a blessing, a good woman, wise and strong, and I threw it away because of pride." Thunder rolled across the prairie as Samuel continued his desperate prayer. "Forgive me, Lord. Give me strength to make this right." His voice cracked. "And Lord, watch over Mia. She deserved better than what I gave her." The storm broke in earnest, then, rain sheeting down in silver curtains. Samuel remained on his knees, letting the water soak him to the skin. In the pasture, his cattle bawled in relief as the parched ground drank deep and water filled the troughs. Through the thunder and rain, Sfeo felt something shift in his spirit. The storm wasn't just water. It was washing away his bitterness, his shame, his foolish pride. Each lightning flash illuminated truth. He needed Mia, not just for companionship, but for her wisdom, her faith, her quiet strength. He had thought himself weak for needing her. Now he understood true weakness had been sending her away. Samuel slept little that night, listening to rain drum on his roof. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the mountains, he was already in his barn, saddling his most reliable horse. The storm had cleared, leaving the world fresh-washed and new. His decision was made. He would ride into town and find Mia. Whether she was building a case against the railroad or against him didn't matter. He had to tell her the truth, that his house wasn't a home without her, that he was sorry, that he wanted her back if she would have him. Samuel swung into the saddle just as the sun broke over the horizon. The morning air was cool and clean after the storm, carrying the sweet scent of wet sage. His horse's hooves kicked up small sprays of water from puddles as they headed toward town, toward hope, toward the woman who had changed everything behind him. The ranch house stood quiet in the early light, waiting to see if its heart would return. Morning sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of the Silver Creek boarding house, casting delicate patterns across stacks of yellowed papers spread across Mia's small desk. Her silver hair caught the light as she bent over an old leather-bound journal, carefully turning brittle pages filled with her late husband's precise handwriting. Thomas Bennett had been a meticulous record-keeper during his years as a surveyor. His neat columns of figures and detailed maps had seemed tedious to Mia back then. Now, 30 years later, each careful notation felt like a gift from beyond the grave. "Here it is," she whispered, touching a faded entry from 1843. The spring that now watered Samuel's cattle had been marked clearly on Thomas's survey map as Common Waters, with a note about local tribes and settlers sharing the resource, Mrs. Murphy. The boarding house matron knocked softly before entering with a pot of tea. "More documents, Mia?" she asked, setting the tray down. "You've hardly touched your breakfast."
"These
"Could change everything," Mia said, accepting a steaming cup. Thomas surveyed this whole region before the territory was even organized. His records show the spring was designated as common land, meant to be shared by all. The older woman peered at the careful drawings. "Those railroad men won't like that much." "No," Mia agreed, "but they can't ignore official survey records." She pulled out another map, this one showing signatures of tribal leaders and early settlers. Agreeing to keep the water source open to all, Mrs. Murphy squeezed Mia's shoulder. "You're a brave one, taking them on like this. Most folks would have given up and moved on by now." "The Lord gives us strength when we need it most," Mia said quietly. "I learned that after losing Thomas and our boy. Sometimes courage is just doing what needs doing, even when you're scared." A commotion downstairs interrupted their conversation. Heavy boots clomped on the wooden steps, followed by Mrs. Murphy's maid announcing a visitor. "Mr. Samuel Hale, to see you, Mrs. Bennett." Mia's heart stuttered, but her hands remained steady as she carefully set down her teacup. "Thank you, Jenny. Please show him up." Samuel's tall frame filled the doorway moments later. His hat was crushed. Between his big hands and his usually pristine boots were dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Mrs. Bennett." Mrs. Murphy gathered her skirts. "I'll leave you two to talk." She paused at the door. "Remember, Mia, you've got a home here as long as you need it." "When?" They were alone. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Samuel shifted his weight, looking more uncertain than Mia had ever seen him. "I was wrong," he finally said, the words coming out rough. "Wrong to speak to you that way. Wrong to let my pride and anger rule my heart." Mia folded her hands in her lap. "You were hurting. That's no excuse." He gestured at the papers covering her desk. "Tom Wheeler told me you've been at the courthouse, gathering evidence." "Yes." Mia's chin lifted slightly. "These are my late husband's survey records. They show the spring was legally designated as common land, meant to be shared by all who live here. The railroad can't claim exclusive rights." Samuel took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I came to ask you to come home," he said. "But I can see you're doing important work here." "I have to finish this," Mia said firmly. "With or without you, Samuel. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about justice for everyone who depends on that water." To her surprise, Samuel nodded. "I understand that now." He twisted his hat brim. "I'd like to stand beside you, if you'll let me. Not as a man too proud to accept help, but as someone who sees the wisdom God sent him in you." Mia felt tears prick her eyes, but kept her voice steady. "It's not pride that wins justice, Samuel. It's truth and faith. The Lord often works through unexpected means, like sending an old surveyor's widow to teach a stubborn rancher humility." The corner of Samuel's mouth twitched. Perhaps Mia allowed herself a small smile. "The hearing is tomorrow morning. I'll be there," Samuel promised, "to support whatever you've found." Later that evening, after Sunday services, Samuel offered his arm for the walk back to the boarding house. The late summer air was soft with cricket song, and oil lamps cast warm pools of light along the dusty street. They walked in comfortable silence, each lost in thought about the morning to come. At the boarding house steps, Samuel released her arm reluctantly. "I'll come by at 9 o'clock tomorrow," he said, "to escort you to the courthouse." Mia nodded, seeing both hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "Thank you, Samuel." She watched him stride away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. Inside her room, Mia lit her bedside lamp and knelt beside her narrow bed. The familiar posture of prayer brought comfort as she closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me wisdom tomorrow. Let truth prevail over greed. And thank you for showing Samuel a path back to faith and community." She touched the worn Bible on her nightstand. "Give us both strength for whatever comes next." The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside her window, a whippoorwill called into the darkness, its lonely song echoing. Across the sleeping town, tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, Mia felt peace settle over her like a familiar quilt. She had done what needed doing, and now she would trust in God's plan to unfold as it should. The courthouse buzzed with tension on that warm September morning. Bodies packed the wooden benches until they creaked, and the air grew thick with the mingled scents of tobacco, leather, and nervous sweat. Railroad men in sleek suits clustered near the front, their confidence evident in their easy smiles and casual postures. Samuel sat rigid beside Mia in the front row, his shoulders stiff beneath his Sunday coat. Around them, the gallery filled with faces both familiar and foreign Mexican vaqueros from neighboring ranches, townsfolk who'd signed the petition, and even a group of Ute elders who had traveled down from their summer camps to attend. Judge Horace Kincaid settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who'd already made up his mind. His silver watch chain gleamed as he adjusted his spectacles, barely glancing at the assembled crowd. Regarding the matter of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad's claim to water rights, he drawled, "I see no reason to revisit our previous ruling, Your Honor." Mia's voice quavered but carried clear across the stuffy courtroom. She rose slowly, clutching a leather portfolio. "I request permission to present new evidence." The railroad lawyer, Mr. Patterson, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The matter is settled." Judge Kincaid peered down at Mia, his expression a mixture of irritation and amusement. "Mrs. Bennett, isn't it? The mail-order bride." Titters rippled through the gallery. Double quotes, "Yes, Your Honor." Mia's spine straightened. "I am also the widow of Thomas Bennett, territorial surveyor from 1840 through 1865. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Samuel watched. As Mia approached the bench, her steps measured and dignified. She opened the portfolio and withdrew a stack of carefully preserved documents. "These are my late husband's official survey records and legal filings," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "They show that in 1843, the spring in question was legally designated as common land, meant to be shared by all residents of the valley." The railroad lawyer scoffed. "Convenient that these documents appear now when I can vouch for their authenticity," Samuel interrupted, standing. His deep voice filled the courthouse, and for Mrs. Bennett's integrity. "She's proven herself a woman of honor and truth." Mia spread the documents on the judge's desk. "Note the official territorial seal, Your Honor." And here she pointed to a carefully drawn map. "You'll see the spring clearly marked as common waters, with signatures from both tribal leaders and early settlers agreeing to maintain shared access." Judge Kincaid frowned, studying the yellowed papers. The railroad lawyer moved closer, his face darkening as he recognized the official markings. "There's more," Mia continued. From the back of the courthouse, people began standing. Maria Gonzalez, who ran the mercantile with her sons, stepped forward. "My father watered his horses at that spring for 40 years, she declared. Everyone used it, shared it, peaceful-like. Sarah Whitman, a ranch widow, spoke next. When Albert died, that spring kept our cattle alive through the drought of '68. Couldn't have survived without it. One by one, witnesses came forward, vaqueros describing decades of shared water rights. Ute mothers telling of their grandmothers gathering medicinal plants by the spring's edge. Old-timers recounting handshake agreements that had held for generations. Murmurs grew in the gallery as the weight of testimony built. Judge Kincaid's smug expression faltered as he paged through Thomas Bennett's meticulous records. The railroad lawyer whispered furiously in his ear, but the judge shook his head, his face growing grave. When the last witness finished, silence fell. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the high windows. Judge Kincaid cleared his throat. The evidence presented is... He paused, clearly struggling, irrefutable. The spring was indeed designated as common land, and that designation was never legally altered. Therefore, I have no choice but to declare the railroad's exclusive claim invalid. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a cheer erupted, starting in the back and rolling forward like summer thunder. The railroad men stormed out, slamming the courthouse door behind them, but their departure was lost in the celebration. Samuel stood frozen until Mia touched his arm. He turned to her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You didn't just save my ranch," he said hoarsely, taking her hand in his. "You saved the valley's very lifeblood. You saved us all." Mia smiled through her own tears, squeezing his calloused fingers. Around them, neighbors hugged and clapped, their joy spilling out onto the courthouse steps and into the street beyond. As evening settled over the valley, lanterns blazed in every home. The sound of celebration drifted on the cooling air fiddle music from the saloon. Laughter from front porches, children running with streamers through dusty streets. Samuel and Mia rode home together, their horses' hooves raising small puffs of dust in the moonlit trail. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Neither spoke, but the silence between them was tender, full of unspoken promises. The spring burbled softly as they passed, its waters catching starlight like scattered silver coins. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, justice had prevailed through the courage of an unexpected champion, and hope flowed as freely as the waters they had fought to protect. Their horses walked close together, shoulders nearly touching, as they made their way home beneath the vast Colorado sky. The following week dawned bright and clear as wagons rattled down the dusty road to Samuel's ranch. Neighbors arrived in force, Mexican vaqueros, Ute families, white homesteaders, all carrying shovels, picks, and determination. The morning air filled with the ring of metal on stone as they began marking the irrigation ditch's path from the spring. Samuel worked alongside men he'd barely spoken to before, his shirt darkening with honest sweat. Jorge Martinez showed him a better way to angle the ditch walls, while two hawks explained how his people had channeled water for generations. Their shared labor bridged old divides, turning strangers into friends. From the outdoor kitchen area, the scent of Mia's cooking drifted across the worksite. Her laughter mingled with the chatter of women preparing meals for the workers. She moved among them with grace, coordinating their efforts as naturally as breathing. When she brought water to the men, her smile lit up Samuel's heart. At midday, Reverend Collins stood at the spring's edge, his Bible open in weathered hands. "Lord," he prayed, "bless these waters and the hands that share them. Let this ditch be a channel of peace between neighbors." The workers bowed their heads, united in hope. As evening painted the sky in purple and gold, the last workers headed home. Samuel and Mia sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge above the newly carved ditch. The sound of hymns and friendly voices drifted from inside, where some neighbors lingered over coffee and pie. Samuel turned to Mia. his voice rough with emotion. "I ordered a bride," he said simply, "but the Lord sent me a wife." Tears gleamed in Mia's eyes as she placed her hand in his weathered palm. Peace settled over Samuel like a blessing. Inside their home, truly their home now, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. And the sound of laughter echoed through rooms no longer empty. Sunday morning painted the valley in gold as worshipers filed into the little white church. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Samuel and Mia stood together in the front pew, their shoulders touching. Samuel's usually stern face had softened, while Mia's silver hair caught the light like a crown. Reverend Collins raised his hands, voice carrying to the rafters. "Let us give thanks for the salvation of our valley and the spring that binds us together as neighbors." The congregation nodded, faces bright with genuine smiles. Gone were the whispers and sideways glances that had once cut like knives. After the final hymn faded, Samuel cleared his throat and stepped forward. His tall frame straightened as he faced the gathered folks, Mia's hand steady in his. "Some of you know I sent away for a bride," he began, voice clear and strong. "What I got instead was God's own blessing. Today, before you all and the Lord. Above, I declare Mia Bennett my wife in heart and deed." Joy erupted through the church. Children clapped with uninhibited delight, their parents beaming. Even the Ute elders, sitting dignified in the back, offered slow nods of approval. Mrs. Martinez wiped tears from her eyes while her husband grinned broadly. As evening settled over the valley, the ranch house glowed with warmth and fellowship. Neighbors crowded around the long table, passing dishes and sharing stories. Laughter rang from every corner as Mia served her famous apple pie, Samuel watching her with undisguised pride. When dusk painted the sky in purple and rose, Samuel and Mia walked the fence aligned together. Their joined hands swung gently between them as they paused to watch cattle drink from the troughs, now full with clear spring water. The irrigation ditch gleamed like silver in the fading light, a testament to community's triumph over division. "You know," Samuel said softly, "I used to reckon I was the loneliest man alive." He squeezed Mia's hand. "Now I feel like the richest soul in Colorado territory." Mia's eyes shimmered in the twilight. "The Lord redeems even in the late hours of life." Samuel. His timing may surprise us, but His grace never fails. Together, they bowed their heads beneath the vast Colorado sky. Their whispered prayers of gratitude mingled with the evening breeze. Around them, cicadas began their nightly chorus, a hymn of praise that carried across the peaceful valley behind them. Lights spilled from the ranch house windows, golden and welcoming. What had once been a place of loneliness now stood as a beacon of hope and home, its warmth reaching out to embrace all who passed by. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.